Crafting the Argument. Presented by Jennifer Kiesler. Writing Studio Coordinator. Kaiser University, Fort Myers, Florida. An academic argument is the expression of your point of view on a specific topic. While arguments usually begin with personal opinions, an opinion is not an argument until it is supported by evidence, or facts, from credible sources. An argument is an issue that is meant to be critically viewed. It is important to understand that an argument is not about proving your point, but it is about supporting your premise. Arguments are very helpful to learning. Arguments can show that you know and understand the material presented, and that you are able to apply your knowledge to various situations. Arguments also sharpen your critical thinking skills. There are several parts to an academic argument. The primary piece is the premise. The premise is your main idea or your claim. The premise should be shared with your audience in the introduction to your argument. Your premise needs to be followed by support. Support means evidence. Evidence means research. An argument is not a valid argument without research. Once you support your premise, you should identify any counter-argument, that is, any valid challenges to your point of view. When you identify your counter-arguments, and explain to your audience why those counter-arguments do not change your premise, you are using your critical thinking skills, and strengthening your argument. Finally, you will conclude your argument with a summary. As mentioned several times, good arguments require the use of your critical thinking skills. But what is critical thinking? Critical thinking has been defined as a mode of thinking in which the thinker improves the quality of his or her thinking by skillfully taking charge of the structures inherent in thinking and imposing intellectual standards upon them. What this means, in a nutshell, is that critical thinking is the process of looking at all sides of an issue, and challenging ideas, even your own. Critical thinking requires more than just thought. It requires an open mind and reflection. It requires you to be honest with yourself, and to entertain the notion that a belief you held may be different than you originally thought. Critical thinking requires courage and self-confidence. Finally, critical thinking requires you to persevere in your quest for answers and solutions. The nemesis of critical thought are logical fallacies. Logical fallacies are defects that weaken arguments. They are usually the result of strongly held beliefs or personal opinions. Logical fallacies are actually quite common and, sometimes, it is difficult to discern when a fallacy has been presented. Becoming familiar with logical fallacies is one way to avoid them. Review some of the common fallacies and see if you can identify the flaw in the logic. For instance, the bandwagon fallacy says that if a belief is common, then it must be true. However, many people believing an idea is not, in itself, evidence of its truth. Take a look at the ad hominem attack example. What is the problem with that statement? If you said that Nixon behaving unethically in Watergate says nothing about the aspects of the policies he supported, then you saw the flaw. Look at the begging the question example. Why is that logic flawed? Right. Mr. Smith may be the boss, but not all bosses are good leaders. Take a few minutes to see if you can identify the flaw in logic on this slide. Pause the presentation now. The first is an example of black/white thinking. There are almost always more than two sides to an issue, and there are definitely more than two ways to solve a problem. Using either/or is misleading. As to example 2, what, exactly, is Dennis Rodman known for? He was a famous basketball player. He was not a diplomat. His basketball skills do not necessarily translate into him being a diplomat or having knowledge of foreign affairs. False causes when the outcome is not obviously a result of the action. You may have passed the class, and you may have relaxed a lot. But correlation does not equal causation. A non sequitur is when the claim is not supported by the evidence. What is the problem with the claim? If I get a new iPhone, I will pass the course. A red herring is an unrelated distraction to the point being made. Yes, to pass the course, you should have studied more. The teacher's personality has no bearing on that statement. Saying school is boring and hard is a generalization. Some students may feel that way, but not all students feel that way. Some students like school. Some students find certain courses less challenging. Finally, spend a few minutes trying to catch the logical flaws in these three statements. The best way to avoid logical fallacies is to understand what they are, so that you can avoid using them in your arguments. Some other tips to keep in mind include questioning your premise. That doesn't mean that you have to change your main point, but if you can identify your point's weaknesses logically, you can strengthen your argument supporting your premise. Make sure you have all of your evidence. If you make a claim, support it with facts. Make sure your characterizations of others are fair and true. Finally, be careful of words that sweep in too much. It is unlikely that everyone will always or never think or act in a certain way.